Welcome to the Rugby Obsession Deep Dive. Before we jump into things today, please make sure you subscribe to the Rugby Obsession YouTube channel and newsletter from the link in the description. So, I want you to imagine for a second that you're running a legacy company. You've been the absolute gold standard in your industry for, over a century.
Right, a total powerhouse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your branding is iconic, your competitors are terrified of you, and your methods are literally studied in business schools. But then suddenly, this disruptive, unorthodox startup bursts onto the scene.
Oh, man. Yeah, the classic disruptor.
Yeah, and they just don't respect the old rules. They're innovating at a terrifying speed, they're structurally dismantling your market share, and worst of all, they're winning everything. So when you're sitting in the CEO's chair watching this happen, your immediate visceral reaction is usually just panic.
Oh, absolutely.
And the temptation, the overwhelming urge, is to completely overhaul your own DNA, to copy exactly what that startup is doing.
Which is the ultimate corporate trap, honestly. And it happens across literally every domain of human competition. You see a winning blueprint, and you just assume that if you reverse engineer it, you're going to achieve the exact same results.
Right.
But that completely ignores the underlying foundation of why that blueprint worked in the first place.
Which brings us perfectly to the mission of our deep dive today. Because we are looking at a fundamental question that spans business, psychology, and high-stakes international sports. When your biggest rival cracks the code to absolute dominance, should you copy their model? Or is that actually a path to destroying your own identity?
It's such a great question.
Right. We're analyzing this fascinating recent article from Planet Rugby that really sets the stage for the 2026 international season. And the landscape is incredibly dramatic right now. On one side, you have South Africa's Springboks. They are sitting on the throne as back-to-back Rugby World Cup champions. Just the undisputed #1 team.
Yeah, they're looking untouchable.
Exactly. But then on the other side, you have their fiercest historical rivals, New Zealand's All Blacks, who have they've stumbled through a brutally turbulent 2 seasons.
Yeah, the contrast right now couldn't be sharper because the All Blacks are historically that dominant legacy company you mentioned. But this recent turbulence culminated in them dismissing head coach Scott Robertson and bringing in Dave Rennie to take over a team that just feels, deeply unsettled.
It's a massive shift.
And Rennie is stepping into an absolute pressure cooker here. He's looking across the Indian Ocean at this South African operation that doesn't just look strong. It looks like an entirely new paradigm for how the sport is played.
And that is exactly where we need to start unpacking the source material, because what is this South African startup actually doing that makes everyone else feel like they're playing an outdated version of the game? The article points directly to Rassie Erasmus as the architect. Since he stepped back into the head coaching role, they haven't just maintained that World Cup momentum. They've ended New Zealand's traditional stranglehold on the Rugby Championship, winning it in both 2024 and 2025.
Erasmus is just fascinating. He treats the game less like a traditional sport and more like a fluid tactical puzzle where every conventional constraint can be challenged. And the Planet Rugby piece highlights a few specific innovations that have completely shifted the tactical landscape.
Okay, let's hear them.
Well, the most famous one, obviously, is the bomb squad replacements.
Oh, right. And for anyone who appreciates the pure physical mechanics of the game, the bomb squad is just terrifying. It's not just making substitutions, it completely alters the oxygen level on the pitch.
Oh, completely.
You have an opposition forward pack that has just spent 50 or 60 minutes grinding in the scrums, hitting rucks. Their legs are completely flooded with lactic acid. It's like baseball, right? Where you bring in a terrifying rotation of fresh closing pitchers to just completely disrupt the opponent's rhythm. Erasmus replaces almost his entire forward pack with massive world-class athletes who are completely fresh.
Yeah, it's an escalation of physical hostilities right at the exact moment the opponent is most vulnerable. And mechanically, it changes the math of the breakdown. It just guarantees dominance in the collision zones for that final quarter.
It's brutal.
It is, but Erasmus doesn't just rely on brute force. The article points out how the Springboks have weaponized open play lineouts, too.
Wait, how so?
So instead of the traditional highly choreographed static lineout where everyone just sets up and waits, their catching defense is completely unset. They throw the ball quickly into open space where a forward is already running this devastating line. They're basically turning a set piece into a dynamic strike play.
Wow. And the source also mentions they're exploiting the law book in very clever ways, which is the part that always fascinates me. Using the rules themselves as an offensive weapon.
Yeah, it's a huge hallmark of the Erasmus era. He and his coaching staff study the refereeing interpretations to an obsessive degree. Like if the law book states a scrum half has a specific number of seconds to play the ball once it's available at the back of a ruck, South Africa schemes their defensive pressure to exploit the exact microsecond of that interpretation.
That's wild.
Right. They manipulate the offside line by engaging in tackles that technically don't form a ruck under the letter of the law, so their players can swarm the ball from angles that traditional defensive systems assume are illegal.
Oh, man.
It creates immense cognitive load for the opposing team. Suddenly, they have to process whether the breakdown is a ruck or just a tackle, all in a fraction of a second.
That cognitive load is such a massive weapon.
Wow.
But there's another layer to this South African model that the article really zeroes in on, and that's their reliance on hybrid players. Like they specifically name Andre Esterhuizen and Marco van Staden as the prime examples of this. They're like multi-tool Swiss Army knives.
Exactly. The hybrid player concept is the linchpin of their whole modern strategy. Traditionally, you have specialists, right? A hooker throws into the line out and strikes in the scrum. A center organizes the midfield defense.
Right.
But take Marco van Staden. He is a flanker, a loose forward who thrives on tackling, who also has the technical ability to throw into lineouts or pack down in the front row if absolutely necessary.
Which is crazy versatility.
And then Andre Esterhuizen is technically an inside center, a backline player, but he's built like a massive loose forward and can jackal for the ball at the breakdown just as effectively.
So they're essentially playing positionless rugby in the collision zones. And mechanically, having guys like that allows Erasmus to run those extreme bench splits because you can afford to put 7 forwards and only 1 back on the bench, which fuels the bomb squad because your players on the pitch can just seamlessly slide into different roles if someone gets injured.
Exactly. It creates this tactical redundancy that is practically bulletproof.
Okay, so this brings me to a major point of friction. And hey, before I get into this, just another quick reminder. If you're enjoying this, please take a second to subscribe to the Rugby Obsession YouTube channel and the newsletter from the link in the description. But okay, I'm looking at this Springbok machine. It's cohesive, it's physically dominant, it manipulates the laws, and it wins.
Yeah, it's a juggernaut.
Right. So if you're Dave Rennie and you see this cohesive winning machine, why on earth wouldn't you just hit copy and paste on Erasmus's playbook? Success leaves clues, right? If bringing on a massive fresh front row at 50 minutes mathematically craters the opponent's defense, why not just find your own monsters and do it?
Well, it's the most logical question to ask. If an algorithm produces a winning output, you copy the algorithm. But rugby is not played on a spreadsheet.
Sure.
And this is where the Planet Rugby article introduces a profound counter-argument from someone who understands winning better than almost anyone, Sir Steve Hansen.
2-time Rugby World Cup winning coach for the All Blacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Hansen speaks, you listen.
Absolutely. And Hansen explicitly warns Dave Rennie against falling into the exact trap you just described. The source references this highly revealing conversation Hansen had on the DSPN podcast with host Martin Devlin.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, and Devlin made an observation that perfectly mirrors your logic. He pointed out that the whole global rugby community is looking at Rassie Erasmus and thinking, okay, this is the new universal model. We all need hybrid players and extreme bench splits.
And Hansen just completely shut that idea down.
He did. And he brought his own lived experience to explain why. He agreed with Devlin that trying to carbon copy the Springboks would be a disaster for New Zealand. He specifically referenced his own time coaching overseas, like in Wales and Japan, to prove that tactics are deeply inherently tied to culture.
Okay, let's unpack this, because culture gets thrown around a lot as a buzzword. I get that cultures are different, but isn't a good tactic just an objectively good tactic?
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't a clever open play lineout work just as well in Auckland as it does in Pretoria?
Because of the psychological and cultural fabric of the players who actually have to execute it under pressure, think about the New Zealand rugby ecosystem. It encourages highly intuitive, fluid, unstructured play from a very young age. Players are taught to read the space, offload the ball, and trust their instincts.
Right.
If you take a tactical system built on that specific intuition and drop it into an entirely different cultural environment, maybe one that historically values rigid structure and strict hierarchy, like Japan, it breaks down.
Ah, I see. Because the operating system doesn't match the software.
Exactly. Or consider Wales, where the rugby culture is driven by intense emotion and physical confrontation. Hansen learned the hard way that what works for New Zealanders doesn't automatically translate.
That makes total sense when you frame it around test match pressure. It's not about the tactic failing on a whiteboard on a Tuesday. It fails in the 78th minute of a test match when your lungs are burning, lactic acid is flooding your brain, and you have to make a split-second decision.
Yes, exactly.
In that moment, humans default to their most ingrained cultural instincts. If your game plan forces a New Zealand player to suppress their instinct to offload and instead play a structured attritional kicking game like South Africa, that cognitive dissonance causes hesitation. And a half-second of hesitation is a turnover.
That is a brilliant way to articulate Hansen's point. That's the art of being a good coach. Tactics are executed by human beings. If a strategy doesn't perfectly align with the natural instincts of those specific players, it will shatter under World Cup knockout pressure. The Springbok model works for South Africa because it is the ultimate expression of South African rugby culture.
Okay, so if Dave Rennie recognizes that copying them is a fatal trap, what exactly should the new All Blacks coaching staff do with the talent they have right now?
Hansen's advice is surprisingly nuanced. He's not saying Rennie should pretend the rest of the world isn't evolving. Instead, he says Rennie should just pinch an idea or two from the Springboks, but only if it naturally suits the All Blacks' style of play.
So it's about having a rigorous filtering mechanism. You look at a global trend, but you force it through the filter of your own team's DNA.
Precisely.
Oh.
And interestingly, the piece notes that Hansen has a lot of faith in the current New Zealand Rugby Board to execute this rebuild. He gave them glowing praise for how they handled the turbulent dismissal of Scott Robertson and the structured process of hiring Rennie.
Which is great because structural stability is so important. If the boardroom is in chaos, you get reactionary decisions like panicking and copying your rival.
Exactly. And because of that stable foundation, they can focus on their own assets. And this brings us to the most compelling tactical insight Hansen offers. He points directly to the specific positional strength New Zealand must build around their front row forwards.
Wait, the front row, the props and the hooker?
Yep.
Usually those guys are just doing the grueling, dirty work in the scrums. What makes the New Zealand front row so unique that Hansen thinks they're the ultimate advantage?
Hansen frames it perfectly. He says New Zealand has big props that can scrum, but they can also play rugby.
I love that, like heavy-duty pickup trucks that somehow handle like nimble sports cars.
Exactly. Mechanically, a prop has to anchor the scrum, clear out bodies at the breakdown, and lift in the line-out. For most teams, if a 260-pound prop does those three things, they've had a world-class game. But New Zealand produces athletes who can do all that primary work while crucially possessing the ball-handling skills of a backline player.
It's a complete structural anomaly. Like, why would New Zealand try to build a bruising tank like the Springboks when they already own these incredibly unique high-performance vehicles?
If 260-pound New Zealand prop takes the ball to the line and then executes a flawless 15-meter cutout pass, it completely breaks the opposing team's defensive system.
It creates overlaps that shouldn't exist. South Africa uses their front row as battering rams. New Zealand can use theirs as extra ball players in the midfield to play a really expansive game.
Wow.
And that ties back to Hansen's ultimate point. New Zealand has traditionally been a strong, dynamic rugby team. Their path back to the top isn't through becoming a knockoff version of South Africa. It's by fiercely evolving their own unique DNA.
It's such a powerful lesson, and it really transcends the sport. True success comes from filtering outside inspiration through your own unique strengths. You can pinch a tactic, but you must adapt it to your own reality. Otherwise, you're just building a cheap imitation.
Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this down in the comments. And please hit that subscribe button for the Rugby Obsession YouTube channel and the newsletter from the link in the description. But before we wrap up.
Yeah, I'll leave you with a final thought to ponder. In an increasingly globalized world where coaches, players, and data cross borders instantly, is it inevitable that national playing cultures will eventually blend together? Or will the teams that fiercely protect their distinct local identities always hold the ultimate advantage over those striving for a homogenized, perfect system?
Man, that's a great question. Thank you for listening to the Rugby Obsession Deep Dive, and we will look forward to you listening to our next episode.